Thank you, David. You know, we have some very talented people here at Unity Temple. A week ago or so, I missed a real good play, and Kim Sheik was in this play called Kiss Me, Kate. I heard rave reviews, Kim, that you did an outstanding job. And this weekend, David was in a concert with John Hardesty, Max Dyer, and Julia Laskowski, and it was amazing. And I just thank you, David, for that. Thank you, Kim, and all of you talented bright lights out there at Unity Temple. Let us know what you're doing. There were these three boys who were debating. You know, boys are very competitive. I'm sure none of you are like that, right? But they're very competitive, and they like to say one-up each other, especially when they're young. So they were debating about whose father was the greatest. And so one said, well, my father is so great that he scribbles a few words on a piece of paper, and they call it a poem, and they paid him $50. And there was, that's nothing. Second boy says, my father is so great that he scribbles a few words on a piece of paper, and they call it a song, and they give him $100. And the third boy says, you don't have anything on my dad. He does even greater work. He's so great that he scribbles a few words on a piece of paper. They call it a sermon. It takes 8 people to collect all the money. So I want to talk to you today about greater works. Last week, I talked about expect a miracle. And I used the scripture where Jesus said, these things I do, you may do also, and even greater works. That's from the book of John, the 14th chapter and the 12th verse. Well, in that talk, I mentioned a couple of people who have done great works out of seeming tragic situations. One of them I mentioned was John Hines. And John Hines is the man who jumped off the San Francisco Golden Gate Bridge and lived to tell about it. And lived to start a program, a movement to help end suicide. To help put an end to this feeling of hopelessness and helplessness, to let people know that there's a place where you can go, there's help. The other one I talked about, and I mentioned something, and someone asked me later about John Hines. What was that fish or whatever it was that I mentioned that kept circling him, he held on to? It was actually a sea lion. He thought it was a shark and was going to kill him. But this sea lion kept circling, and he just felt something slippery. He thought maybe about 74 feet underwater when he was trying his hardest to swim to the surface before he was rescued. And he was told later that that particular area of the San Francisco Bay is filled with sea lions. So that was an angel in the form of a fish. The other one I talked about is it was Kevin Hines, and John A. Smith. And John A. Smith is a young man who fell through ice at Lake St. Louis, and probably by all accounts scientifically should not have lived to tell about it. But the one thing I forgot to mention is that is a movie right now that's just out called Breakthrough, and it's a powerful movie. Hi, John. I didn't see you sitting there. That's John Hardesty. Good to see you. Not the John of the falling through the ice. So how many of you noticed, because I asked you last week to notice the miracles that you're going to experience. Did anybody experience any small or big miracles last week? Did you pay attention? Yes. Thank you. Yes. Good. Because I see lots of hands. Wonderful. Because most of the time they're happening all around us and we don't pay attention. These are the greater works of which Jesus was talking about. When we are awakened in consciousness to what is going on all around us, we recognize the greater works that are already being done in, around, and through us. Now, when Jesus said this to the disciples, you would think he was saying, well, okay, I've walked on water, I've fed the 5,000 with 2 loaves and 5 fish, I've healed the sick, I've raised the dead, and these things I do, you may do also, and even greater works. But that's not what he was talking about. He didn't expect the disciples to do the same exact things, to perform the same exact miracles. What they did was bigger than that, because when he spoke, there were only a few people. There were only a few. For example, the 5,000. Well, how many millions get the message today? We've got the internet. We've got live stream right now. People all over the world are getting information about greater works, and they're doing greater works because they get to know more about it than those 5,000 or those few hundred or those 40 or so that heard Jesus speak himself. So this is what greater works mean. It doesn't mean we go out and do the same thing. It means we do the thing in a bigger way. Whatever is ours to do, whatever is your gift, your talent, you give that in a bigger way. Those are the greater works. One person came up to me after last Sunday and said, I'd like to hear more about the unity principles. And when you give us feedback, we respond. So in response to that feedback, I want to tell you about the principles. So I'm going to start with principle number 5, which ties directly to greater works. Now, principle number 5 says, knowing the truth, knowing the other principles is not good enough. You have to practice. You have to live the truth you know out loud. That's your greater work. That's your greater work. So backing up to that, I always start at the end of a magazine or the end of a book. For some reason, I'm weird that way. So I start with the end. You know, Covey said begin with the end in mind, and then I move back to the beginning. So in the beginning, there are 5 unity principles. No dogma, no creed, nothing you have to memorize. These are automatic. Everybody does them whether you know it or not. Principle number 1 is there is one presence and one power active in my life and in the universe. God the good, omnipotence. What does that mean? One presence and one power. We hear about duality all the time in religions, right? There's a heaven and a hell, a good and a bad, a God and a devil, or Satan, right? But in my life, and Scripture says, as for me and my house, I will serve the Lord. In my life, there is one presence and one power active in my life. And I see that presence and power active in the universe, God the good, omnipotent. The second principle is that since I am, according to Unity's textbook, the Bible, since I am made in the image and likeness of God, I must inherit goodness. So I was called to task on that statement on Friday. I spoke at the coffee clutch at Village Shalom, a Jewish community. And one of the residents there said, so how do you explain Hitler? If we're all inherently good, how do you explain Hitler? And as I said to these young people this morning in our Bible study, everyone, without exception, is inherently good. So how do I explain bad things that good people do? We all have the power within us to be good, but we also have the will to do whatever we want to do. We can choose not to act in good ways. But we are all inherently, deep within us is our divine nature. Jesus was human and divine. And when he said, these things I do, you may do also in even greater works, he was calling forth the divinity in us, our own innate divinity. So we got into a little bit of discussion about, how some people can appear to be evil and do evil acts, and how can I actually say that that person is inherently good? Reverend Julian Telesford likes to tell us, inherent means in here it is. In here it is. In here is the good in you. In here is the God in you. Now it's up to you to call forth and to express that God in you, but it's there, whether you express it or not. We are not born to do bad things. Babies are born with unconditional love, just like the song that David sang. Babies are born loving. I don't think anybody is born into this world with the idea that I'm going to grow up and kill somebody. I'm going to grow up and spew hate I'm going to grow up and steal. No. That is a learned behavior. And so this man, after I said all that, looked up at me and said something that Steve Sanders has said many times in our Bible class. From the movie South Pacific, you have to be carefully taught to hate by 7 or 8. Right? By 7 or 8, you have to be taught to hate. By 7 or 8. So this is what Jesus meant about greater works, that we have the power within us to do great things if we choose to tap into that inner power. So the third principle is the law of mind action, that human beings create their experiences by the activity of their minds. Everything starts in the mind first. So we can create our heaven, or we can create our own hell right here. It's right between our ears. It's not out there and over there. It's right here. I don't need to die to go to some place. I live it right here. On any given day, I can create a living nightmare for myself in my own mind. And on any given day, I can create heaven in my own mind. Thoughts held in mind produce after their kind. That's a phrase I learned in Sunday school here. I pulled out a book that I dearly love by Florence Scovel Shinn called The Game of Life and How to Play It. Now, this book was written in 1925, but it's still just as true today as it was when Florence wrote it. In the very beginning of the book, called Chapter 1, The Game, she writes, "Most people consider life a battle, but it is not a battle, it is a game. It is a game, however, which cannot be played successfully without the knowledge of spiritual law. And the Old and New Testaments give the rules of the game with wonderful clearness. Jesus Christ taught that it was a game, a great game of giving and receiving. What we give, we get back. Greater works. Your greater works are the result of your giving and receiving. You can pretty much trace back anything that's happening in your life to where your thoughts have been. Now, that doesn't mean that some circumstances that happen in your life are your fault. It simply means how you react to those circumstances, what you do with that, whether you choose to make that a teachable moment in your life. What has this come to teach me? How can this make me a better human being? How can this give me more compassion so that I can live out the divinity, the truth that is in me, the real me? Principle number 4 is how we find that truth. This is what Myrtle Fillmore taught from her own experience. Unity's co-founder, Myrtle Fillmore, experienced a traumatic healing from a terminal disease because she learned to tap into the divinity within. She went into the silence, which we relish here in Unity. She went into prayer and meditation, and she listened to God. What is my greater work? I'm sure is what she was thinking. I only have 6 months to live. What am I supposed to do with that? What about my family? But instead of focusing on what she didn't have or what might happen, she began to focus on what was in her presence, what she had right there in front of her. She was still there. She was still alive. Instead of focusing on dying, she focused on living. And she began to speak life to every cell of her body. And her body responded. And it's documented. It's a documented fact that she lived another 40 years after a terminal diagnosis with tuberculosis. She was supposed to live 6 months. But Myrtle Fillmore had a greater work. We are beneficiaries of this greater work called unity. She gave birth to this greater work, she and her husband Charles, based on the foundation of love. That's it. That's it. Love yourself and love your neighbor as yourself. And who's your neighbor? Everybody. Even the ones that do hateful things and say hateful things. Because they are also made in the image and likeness of God, and they too have a greater work. And it might be waking you up from your sleep. That's their greater work. It might be challenging you to let your light shine. is their greater work. So prayer and meditation, affirmative prayer, not begging, beseeching prayer like I learned when I was a kid. God, please give me a bicycle for Christmas. But affirming that all of my needs are met. That through the God mind, the divinity in me, I have everything I need. I have all the wisdom. I'm healed. I'm whole. I'm prosperous. All good things come my way. In ministering to someone who was having difficulty finding a job, Florence Scovel Shinn writes in her book, The Game of Life, she gave them an affirmation. I have a wonderful work in a wonderful way. I give wonderful service for a wonderful pay. So if you're struggling with some kind of job issue or employment issue, that might be a good one to affirm. I have a wonderful work in a wonderful way. I give wonderful service for a wonderful pay. And affirm the goodness of what you have in your hands, what's already there. Paul said it this way. Through affirmative prayer, he said, finally, brothers and sisters, whatever is true, whatever is honorable, whatever is right, whatever is pure, whatever is lovely, whatever is admirable, if anything is excellent or praiseworthy, think on these things. Don't think about what's in front of you that appears to be lack and limitation, not enough, but think on the things that are worthy of praise. We have a spark of divinity within us, whether we recognize it or not. It's our inheritance, and here it is. That's where the good work begins. There's a story about Denzel Washington that I really love. How many of you know who Denzel Washington is? How many of you saw the Book of Eli? Yeah, one of my favorites of his movies. He does a lot of those other kind of movies my husband likes, you know, the action and blood and guts, but I like the Book of Eli the most. Well, what I learned about Denzel Washington is no coincidence that he would star in such a book about the Bible, because he's read it, according to a 2017 news article, 3 times, backwards and forwards. His father was a Pentecostal minister. His mother owned and operated a beauty parlor in New York, where he grew up. At 14, he was heading in the wrong direction, hanging around with the wrong friends. His father and mother had divorced, and his mother put him in a private school, and that changed his life. In an interview about what inspired him to become such a great actor, he said when he was 21, he had flunked out of college. And he was just about to give up on any dreams that he might have. And he was sitting in his mother's beauty shop one day and feeling sorry for himself and thinking about all the bad things and not affirming the good, when this woman came over to him, an elderly lady who had been a member of their church for many years. And she says, "You're going to speak before millions." And then she wrote down prophecy on a little bitty blue piece of paper and an envelope. It was a blue envelope. His mother came over and wrote down preacher. He folded it and put it in his pocket, having no idea he'd ever be this movie star. Right? But he had flunked out of college. So how was this all going to happen? Well, the truth is, when there is a greater work that you've been assigned to do, it's your assignment, all the things you need are going to come in your direction. Everything. You'll meet the right person at the right time and in an unusual circumstance, and they'll recognize this divinity in you, and they'll point you in a certain direction or say something to you that sparks that creativity, that leads you in the right direction toward your dream. That's the greater work. See, they're doing their greater work, and they're inspiring you to do yours. A couple of years ago, I was down in Florida teaching a ministerial class at Christ Church Unity in Orlando. And I had so many things going on my plate, that's just my modus operandi, but I had too many things going on, and I was kind of worrying about one thing that I needed to do. And I didn't discuss it with anybody, but this lady came over to me at the break, and she says, "You're writing a book, aren't you?" And I go, "Well, yeah, but how'd you know that?" "Well," she says, "you need to focus on that book. it's a bestseller. When my mother fell and broke her hip about 5 years ago, actually, yeah, 5 years ago, because she'll be 99 next Monday. Not this Monday, but next Monday. I decided to start writing about her life. And so I call it the Book of Mary. Give me my flowers while I can still see the blooms. That's a song my mother has always talked about that she loves. And one of the verses is, I'd rather have one tulip while I'm living than a truckload of roses when I'm dead. And tulip that's a metaphor for give me your love, your time, your attention. Show me your greater works while I'm here to see them. And so when I went and asked somebody, who is this lady? Just like Denzel did. He went and asked his mother, who is this lady? Well, she's a prophet. She's known in our church for her prophecy. And I asked someone, who is this lady? Her name is Pat. Oh, did Pat say something to you? Well, yes, she did. You can take it to the bank. Pat has predicted a lot of things. I'm still working on that book. I'm trying hard to get it done. I'm almost at the point where I'm going to have to stop where I am and get this part done as a part one so I can present it. Mom has read, I've read it to her 3 or 4 times. She shouts, she screams, she laughs, she finishes sentences. I can't hardly get through the whole paragraph without her telling the story, and it's just hilarious. And then one of our congregants has heard me talk about it so much that Jim Odebeck came out to my house and videotaped my mother telling her own story, which I plan to be a part of the book for those generations that won't get to live to see her greater works. You see, we are standing on the shoulders of giants right here because of the greater works, not only of the Fillmores, but all those who followed in their footsteps, all those ministers, all those teachers, all those leaders. We are the recipients of greater works, and that calls us to do greater works. So I wanted to talk to you about a greater work right here at the temple. I know I've bragged about her before, and I hope she won't mind. She's sitting over there. But I want to talk about Janet Mays, because I have just been floored by what this woman did. Things that we all want to do but don't know how. She's a receptionist. We have lots of volunteers who volunteer their time, their talents, and their treasures and come here throughout the week, answer the phones, send out mail, fold the bulletins. They're always around here doing things. They're angels. We have staff that are just phenomenal. 7 days a week. Our musicians, our ministers, our classes. We have people that are doing greater works in this church every day and outside the church in the community. So Janet Mays is sitting in the receptionist desk on her day of volunteering, answering the phones, sending out mail and so forth, and these people come in and they need help. And we would give them some information on where to go to a nearest shelter or to get food or whatever, and Janet said, I can't do this anymore. I just can't do it. It's hard. I've been there. I've wanted to just reach in my pocket and just hand over my wallet, but you can't do that. I've been there. So I know that feeling of helplessness. And Janet said, Duke, can we do something? If I come up with something and give it to you? And Duke says, yes, please. Because he's always doing stuff for everybody. And so Janet comes up with this Helping Hand project. Yesterday, I was here doing a triple christening. 2 kids being baptized and a younger baby being christened. And a young man came in, he says, do you have anything? And Cassie said, I'll be with you in just a moment. Because Janet and the staff have set up a closet. And in that closet are ball caps, visors, socks, instant eye packs, snacks, peanut butter cups, tuna and crackers, small Gatorades, bottled water, washcloths and wipes, soap, deodorant, toothbrush, toothpaste, tissues, chapstick, feminine products, you name it. What do most people need? The basic needs that you can't get when you're sleeping under a bridge. Greater works. It's one thing to get up here and talk on Sundays. I could talk all day long about what we should be doing, what we ought to be doing. We've got greater work to do right here in our community, right here in this church. Greater works. So if that inspired you at all, Janet, would you stand up? See this lady. See her after the service. Hang around, Janet. You got some place to go. Because we got some people in here that want to join you in greater works. That's what it's all about. That's what Jesus was all about. That's what he taught in the 3 years of his ministry. These things I do, you may do also, and even greater works. Even greater works. Something is drawing you. Something is compelling you. Something brought you here this morning because you have a greater work to do, and you just needed to hear the right word so you can be inspired enough to do your greater works. What are your gifts and talents? What are you holding back from? What's driving you? What's that passion in you that really wants to come alive? That's your greater work. I invite you to think about what is yours to do. Florence Scovel Shen in The Game of Life says, there is a power that you are to feel, something you are to do which no one else can do. And she advises us to begin each day with the right words. Make an affirmation as soon as you wake up. Thy will be done this day. Today is a day of completion. I give thanks for this perfect day. Miracle shall follow miracle, and wonders shall never cease. I invite you now to take this into your divine self as we move into meditation, and just listen to Spirit as it whispers to you what is your greater work.